Hi everybody, I'm Allison Freyberg and welcome to the Writing Lounge. Today we are going to be doing APA style essentials. We're going to do formatting, in-text citations, and references. So let's dive in, shall we? As you may know, I am Professor of Communication and Cultural Studies in the School of Business and Society at the University of Redlands, and I teach leadership communications, some consulting, critical thinking, and of course this writing lounge, in addition to being the Associate Director of International Programs. If you want to reach me, there's my information right there. You can also find out anything that's going on in the Writing Lounge by just going to redlands.edu/writing lounge. And if you want to find out anything about our international programs, it's redlands.edu, SB International Programs. All right, APA style. I get a lot of people have a lot of trouble with APA. It just feels overwhelming, and this is what I hear the most. I hear, why do I have to use APA? Why can't I use MLA? I hear, I get confused about what I'm supposed to cite and what's okay to leave out. I hear, I'm not sure how to cite, so I just quote everything. And then I get some folks who just say, you know what, I'm terrible at references lists and I'm always going to be terrible. And then there are other reasons too. So I don't know which ones, strike you as familiar, but if you can see yourself in one of these statements, you're not alone. And we're going to see if we can get past that today. We're going to be focusing on the APA Style 7th edition, which came out in the summer of 2020. So there's some changes from the older version. And what is APA style? It's really just guidelines that help us be consistent across research, okay? And a way to maintain the integrity of research. It's used in the social sciences, and that's why you have in our business programs, you use APA because business is a social science. When you learned MLA, you probably did that in an English department, which is part of the humanities, and the humanities rely more on MLA. So that's why. Now, in a deeper level of that's why, you need to kind of think of research as a way of understanding the kind of work that comes before you, that there's a lot of research out there and we're working with it and we're trying to bring it into our work. We're trying to contribute to that discussion as well. Well, APA is there to help you organize that. It may not feel like it's there to help you organize that, but hopefully in the next few minutes it will feel a little more like that. What is APA format? It's just a consistent way to organize and structure research papers. Title pages, body text, references, tables, all that kind of stuff. How do you format a paper? Well, you know what? There are free APA templates everywhere. Most word processing programs use them, text editors. You can also download a template, that's fine, or create your own formatted document to use. Any of those options is fine. But I also think it's kind of important to have a real sense of what you're doing so that you can, be in charge of quality control over the work that you're producing. Now, we're going to start off with format, then we're going to go to in-text citations, and then we're going to go to some references. Now, for paper formatting, one thing you've got in this collection here, and if you would like these slides, all you have to do is email me. Again, you can find me Allison_Freyberg at redlands.edu. I'm very easy to find. And so all you have to do is email me and I will send you these slides, okay? Because this packet here is meant to really serve as a reference guide. I'm going to try to include about 90% of what you'll ever need to use in APA will be covered in these slides, okay? If you want links to APA directly, they are live links in here, and the file I send you will have those live links. And if you wanted to know more about paper formatting from APA, anything you want to know would be right here, okay, at this link. I'm going to focus on a few key items. Order of pages. So all papers generally have a title page, a body text, and a references page. And this is the order they usually appear in. First is the title page. If you're writing an abstract, then you have a separate page that comes next for the abstract. Usually student papers don't have to provide an abstract, but if you're in a doctoral program or you're submitting towards publication, you'll usually have to write an abstract. As always, check with your instructor. Then there's the body of your paper, the text. Then comes the references, then tables, then figures, then appendices, and each of these categories would start a new page. Okay. For a sample annotated paper from APA, a student version one, just click on that link and it'll take you right to one. Oh yeah, 1-inch margins all around. So that's usually a default on any text editor word processing program. So just leave that alone and it should be fine. Don't sort of increase your margins to 2 inches each side, and we know that. We know when you do that, okay? And you know why? Because we used to do it too. All right. Here's sample title page from APA, title page setup, and this one's a little different than what you might be familiar with from earlier versions of APA. First thing you'll notice is there's just a page number right here, top right hand corner, and that title page is page 1. There's nothing else up here. Now, in previous editions, there used to be a running header and all that kind of stuff, and it was trouble. Anyway, it's gone. So this is what your title page looks like. There's your title. You'll notice that it is in bold, and the first letters of the major words are capitalized. Then there's a double space, and you get the author's name. You get the, in this case, you'd probably put the course and the instructor's name and then the date, and that would be fine. Okay. Again, in APA, no running header anymore. Line spacing. Everything's double spaced. Everything's double spaced. Everything is double spaced. Okay, you notice the title page was double spaced, your references page is double spaced, all the body text is double spaced. The only exceptions are on the title page. Remember I said there was a double space between the name and then the rest of the information, or not the name, the title and then the rest of the information? That's a change. And then in tables and figures, you can single space them. And equations, because they're so awkward structurally, you can triple or quadruple space those if needed. But that's not a ton of your paper. So any of the major writing part, double spaced. Now, here's a little bit of writing. I know it's small. It doesn't matter because we're looking at the formatting mostly right now rather than reading the actual words. You want to align left. See this? Everything's aligned left. And again, that should be your default. You'll notice on the right-hand side, there's ragged edges. That should also be your default. Don't full justify the right-hand side because then that evens this out and the spacing becomes it just doesn't work. Indent the first line of every paragraph a ½ inch, and your default should be that ½ inch in whatever program you're using. Don't change that. That's what it's supposed to be. And if you've been in business settings for a while, then you're probably not used to indenting paragraphs, but in academic writing, you do indent paragraphs and double space, for example. You want to, in terms of your level 1, those are your major headings. You're going to want to center them. And in terms of your level 2 headings, your subheadings, they're going to be over here on the left-hand side. For tables and figures, you're going to want to flush left. That's it, just like here. And again, I know you can't see this unless you have major screen right now, but I wanted to show you that there is an annotated sample paper at APA right at this link right here. Okay. All right, so that's your basic formatting. Not too bad. Title page, body text, references page. Everything starts on a new page. Everything's double spaced, 1-inch margins, indent the first line of a paragraph. Now we're going to go on to in-text citations. What is an in-text citation? It's how you credit your sources. You credit the information you've found elsewhere that you're bringing into your paper. And you do that either by quoting or by paraphrasing. We'll talk about both of those in a minute. What sources need to be cited in text? Any idea that isn't yours. Any idea that isn't yours. Any idea that isn't yours and that isn't common knowledge for your audience needs to be credited within the body of the text and in the references page. If it isn't, you're running into plagiarism problems. Okay. There is a writing lounge on paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is when you usually get into plagiarism problems. And we also have a writing lounge on plagiarism explicitly. So I invite you to have a look at those at the writing lounge. Sources you don't need to cite is stuff that's common knowledge for your audience. And for your audience is key there, because if you're at a conference, let's say you're at an accounting conference, so everyone there is very familiar with accounting concepts. In that sense, common knowledge is going to be very different than common knowledge for a general audience. So you always have to think, what is 80% of my audience going to already know as common knowledge? So you really have to think about your audience. Okay. And if you're in doubt, cite it. Okay. Anything you want to know about in-text citations from APA, you can find right here. Okay. Now, we'll take a little second here to talk about plagiarism. This is how APA describes plagiarism, and you can read through that. But I wanted to just take a second to understand kind of the underpinnings of it. Where does this energy come from? Because I know it sounds like we just get all in a bunch in university about plagiarism, and why is that the case? And I'll tell you why. It's not, we're not trying to be fussy. We're not trying to impose rules that are arbitrary. University, at its core, is really about one thing. We may call it physics, we may call it art history, we may call it English, business, management, education. We can call it all sorts of things. But fundamentally, it's really about all the ideas that have come before us, all the knowledge produced, and our confronting of that knowledge, our understanding of that knowledge, and our attempt to contribute to that conversation. So what it all comes down to is there's lots of ideas that have come before us, and we're trying to join that table and offer more ideas, offer additions, offer something new. And that's why knowing which ideas are somebody else's and which ideas are yours is so important. Okay. So some basic elements of in-text citations. You're going to want to tell us who did it and when did they do it. And this is from APA, and they break it down a little more. We're going to, they actually break it down in terms of, if you're using APA, you're using paraphrasing a lot, which I'll talk about. And that's where you explain somebody else's idea in your own words. And APA talks about two ways of doing this. One they call a parenthetical citation, in which the author and the date are in parentheses, hence parenthetical. But sometimes you write the citation by talking about the author in the sentence itself. And then all you do in parentheses is add the date. Now, APA calls that a narrative citation because the author's name appears in your narrative. Let's look a little closer. Paraphrases. That's when you are explaining somebody else's idea in all your own words, in your own voice, in your own way of saying things. Again, have a peek at the Writing Lounge called Paraphrasing Live Demo. Show you how to really work on paraphrases, because that's what I actually hear from students that they have the most trouble with. Okay. Now, in a paraphrase, we need to know whose idea it is and when did they publish this idea. That's all in text. The rest will be in the references page. So here's a couple of examples. Okay. A structural shift was isolated as the primary reason for increased work hours in the U.S. That is Shore's idea, and that's when that idea was published. So, and it's in parentheses, so it's a parenthetical citation. All these words here are my words. They're my explanation of Shore's idea. Here's another way of doing it. This is with narrative citation. According to Shore, then you get the date, a structural shift is the reason behind increased U.S. work hours. Again, there's the citation, author, date, and then these are all my words. They're Shore's idea, but I've said it using my words, my voice, my syntax, my diction, my everything. It's just Shore's idea. You can find a lot more of that over here at this link. So paraphrasing is how most source information is brought into your writing in APA. Sometimes, though, you need to quote. Now, when do you need to quote? You need to quote when you can't paraphrase, when the words that the author, that your source used, that you just can't imagine saying it any other way. That's when you quote. Again, usually in APA, probably 3/4, maybe 75, 80% of your work is paraphrased, and there's a little bit of quoting when you just can't say it any other way. Now you need a little more information on a quotation. You need, like a paraphrase, you need to say who's talking, when was it published, but now since it's an exact quote, it's the exact words of the text, you need to say where that comes from. Let's have a look. Here we have Parker, 2014, argues that, and here's the quote, in quotation marks, blah, 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 blah. Those are Parker's exact words. And here's the extra information, P period 25, because it appears on page 25. So what do you need? You need these three items: author, date, location. Author, date, location. You can also do it another way. Let's say I started with the actual quote, blah, 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 end quote, argues Parker. So what's the information I have left? This is the who. I need the when and the where. Now sometimes, oh, I don't know if you can see it because my little thumbnail appears right there, but, and I don't want to mess this up too by trying to move my thumbnail. Let's see if I can. Oh yeah, there we go. Marquez argues that, quote, blah, 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 blah. Now, sometimes articles don't have page numbers and they just appear in a series of paragraphs. So you go ahead and count out those paragraphs. And this quote appeared in paragraph 6. So it's para.6. Okay. You can find out lots more stuff right here, and I encourage you to do so. That's really it. Paraphrases and quotes. Paraphrases have author and date. Quotes have author, date, location. Nothing else. The rest is going to be in the references. Now, you do have to repeat a citation, right? If you were talking about Parker, if you want, Parker, you were summarizing Parker's idea in multiple places in the text, well, what do with the repetition? Again, it's always author date for a paraphrase. And if it's in the same paragraph that you're referring to Parker multiple times, and you clearly indicate with your words that it's a continuation in this of Parker's ideas or your source's ideas, then you don't have to keep shoving the date in there. Let's look at a couple of examples. So here we have Marquez et al. Et al just means there's more authors. 2018, and they argue blah, blah, blah. It's summarizing because there's no quotation marks and no page numbers, so I am paraphrasing Marquez et al. there. Now in the next sentence, I want to continue paraphrasing them. And all I had to do was use a pronoun. As soon as I say they, I know we're still talking about Marquez et al. That's good enough. Okay, so I don't need they 2018. It's just they, I know I'm referring to this. Okay, and then here, blah, 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 again, a paraphrase, Marquez et al. 2018. Okay, perfect. How do I want to continue on and repeat the citation without always saying Marquez et al. 2018? Look at this. Results of the study concluded blah, blah, blah. Which study? Obviously this study. Okay, so it's not that hard to indicate the repetition of a citation by using keywords that clearly indicate you're referring to that same text. Couple other things within text citations. This is a chart. You may want to just get these slides just for this chart because this is not something you want to remember. And this has to do with numbers of authors to include it in text citations. And this is in text citations only. And it tells you how to do one author, two authors, what happens when there's three or more authors, what happens when there's a group author, what happens when there's a group author that doesn't have an abbreviation, like National Institute of Mental Health has an abbreviation NIMH you can use subsequently. But, Stanford University doesn't have an abbreviation. So you just want to keep this handy so that you can refer to it when you need to. This is a question I get asked a lot. It's like, hey, I read this really great quote by Marquez, but it wasn't a text by Marquez, it was in a text by Parker. So Parker had quoted Marquez, and you want to use Marquez's idea in your paper. That's called, according to APA, citing a secondary source, because it's not in the source you're looking at, it's your source went looking for that information. Whew, how do you do that? Well, to be honest, don't. You want to try to stay away from that? You should go read the original. So if Parker had quoted Marquez, you should go find Marquez. That's the sign of good research. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I will show you one example because sometimes we just do this. So here's an idea. This is Rabbit's idea. It was cited in Lyon et al. Okay, so it's Rabbit's idea, but you found it here. Don't rely on this format. Okay, this should be a very rare exception. All right, that's it with in-text citations. We're going to move on to the references list now. What is a references list? It's a list of sources that appear in your paper. But now in this reference list, which is at the end of your body text on a new page, that's where people are going to be able to find the work that you've cited in text. So we've been talking about Marquez and Parker. Well, telling us their name and the date isn't going to help us find the thing. The references list does that. What sources need to be in your references list? Anything published, posted, printed, source appearing in your paper. Well, that's a tongue twister. From which you drew information and ideas. Okay, if it's somebody else's ideas, you need to get it in your references list. And anything that appears in your references list has to appear in the body of your paper in an in-text citation. And anything that appears in an in-text citation has to appear in the body of your paper, in the references list. So I might have referred to Marquez et al. 10 times in my paper, but there will be a listing, one, in your references list for Marquez et al. What doesn't need to be in your references list? Let me move myself over here again. Personal communications, general mentions of websites like Toyota.com. You wouldn't just write Toyota.com in your references list. The names of periodicals just on their own without being linked to an article in any way. Software apps, that's the kind of stuff you don't need to list. And of course, all you will ever need is right here. Go have a look, live links, just ask me for these slides. And here we go, some formatting essentials. One thing you'll notice is that first we started on a new page, our references list, and then at the top of the page, centered, is the word references in bold with a capital R, references. You'll notice that then we started on a new page, the listings are alphabetized. They are double spaced. They are left aligned, but then you have these indents, right? On this, any line after the first line of a citation, a reference, is indented, and those are called hanging indents. And you can find that by just clicking on the paragraph option in whatever your word processing program is. And that will help you out a lot. Here are some basic elements. Now, what I've included are what I think probably 90% of the kinds of examples for reference lists that you will need in your program of study. There may be a few things that aren't here, but I've tried to include the ones that seem to occur most often. And we're not going to have time to go through them all, but let's get the basic pattern down, because there is a basic pattern, and once you know that basic pattern, this all becomes so much easier. By the way, there are citation generators. Oh my goodness, use them. Absolutely use them. They're fantastic. There's Zotero, which is free, and it works great, especially if you're doing bigger and bigger and bigger projects. Absolutely do a citation generator. But bear in mind that you need to know, often with citation generators, you need to know what needs to get capitalized and what doesn't, because the citation generator will just obey you. Okay, but let's get the syntax down. This is basically the basic elements for reference list entries. The author, so who's responsible for this work? The date, when was it published? The title, what's the work called? And finally, the source, where can I retrieve it? So here's your flow. Who, when, what, where. So it kind of looks like this in its general form. Author, and you notice there's no first names in APA, you just use initials. So last name and then initials. Last name, initials. That's our who. That's our when. This is our what. This is the title of what they wrote. And this is where you found that work. Let's look at some examples. Okay, now you can find all this mostly on your first pages of any article. You're going to find all the information you need. Okay, and even when you're looking this stuff through databases at Armacost Library, you can actually export the citation, and the library software will just do it for you. The database software will do it for you. Again, you need to know what to capitalize. You might need to do some tweaks, but you can export that citation. I invite you to come to our next writing lounge where Janelle Julage is going to facilitate us through an orientation of using the databases at Armacost Library. All right. Most of the time you're going to be looking up journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles. What's the syntax? Same. Who, when, what, where. So we're going to go down here and do the generic. There's the who. There's the when. There's the what. This is the title of the article in sentence case. Now, sentence case just means like a sentence. And in a sentence, the first letter of the first word is capitalized. The rest aren't. Unless it's the only exception would be unless it's a proper noun, like the name of a place, or something like that. And then the name of the journal in which the article appears, that goes in italics. Now we're on the source, the where. Volume number, still in italics. The number, back to non-italics. Pages of the whole article. And then this is called a DOI, a Document Object Identifier. That's like a permanent address for an article or other kinds of information as well. But if there is a DOI, you go ahead and write that in just like this, okay? And you fill in whatever the X's are. It'll be on the title page of the document. So it looks like this. So there's a bunch of authors, right? But you only get last names and then initials, last name, initial, last name, initial, so, until you're done with all the authors. 2019 is the date it was published. What did they write? They wrote an article called Emotions in Storybooks, a comparison of storybooks that represent ethnic and racial groups in the United States. That's the name of the article. Psychology of Popular Media Culture. We've jumped into source where I retrieved it. Where did I find that article? I found it in this journal. So the journal gets italicized and gets capital letters. And that's the volume. That's the number, the issue number. And then those are the pages of the entire article. And there's a DOI. It's going to cover a lot of ground for you right there. Now, sometimes you might be citing newspaper articles. Same kind of syntax. Author, date, title, source. Who, when, what, where. Who, when. Now you'll notice the difference here is the when. The date actually has a month and a day, and that's because this newspaper appears daily. So you can't just put a year there. If it appears daily, you need to put the day and the month so that someone can find it. Can we get better at forgetting is the title. It's what the work is called, what Carrie wrote. The New York Times is the source. And then where can I retrieve it? Right here. There's a URL. Now this same thing, author, date, title, Washington Post, but I just did page numbers. I didn't do the URL. And that's an indication that I actually had a real newspaper that I touched in my hands. And I looked at page A1 and A4, and there was the article. Okay. So there's the generic formatting. Sometimes you're using a book, right? And this is a book that's just been authored by, it's just whole authored. That means it's either one or two or three or four, or maybe multiple authors, but they wrote all the words in the book. So again, author, date. This is the title of the book, and you'll notice book titles are in italics. But what's weird here? Look at that. It's in sentence case. Right? You kind of want this to be capitalized, don't you? The psychology of prejudice, but no, not in APA. Only the first letter of the first word and then the first letter of the first word after if there's a colon. Okay. If there are multiple editions, textbooks would have this, for example. You put the edition right here. And then you put the publisher. And the publisher, the only time you're putting the publisher down is when you're referencing a book. Journals, you would never put the publisher down. Okay. And then where did I find it? Now it had a DOI. I guess it was an electronic book. So there's a DOI for it. Here's a second one, author, date, title of the book. And in this case, the publisher is Penguin Books. Boom, that's it. Now, sometimes books you're using, also especially course books, textbooks, will have an editor, and each chapter is written by somebody else. It's an anthology, it's a collection. And in this case, it has a little different, it's again, same kind of syntax, but just a little couple things to watch out for. So in this case, the author is the editor of the book. And you indicate that right there, ED period. That's when it was published. That's the name of the book. And the publisher is Academic Press. Great. Okay, so just a little bit different there. Probably the hardest one I'm going to introduce is this one. Now, it's a chapter in an edited book. So it's something that's written not by the editor. Like let's say the third chapter in an edited collection was written by somebody else, right? The editor collects the articles and makes a book out of them. In this case, these names are the authors of the chapter. And this is when it was published. And this is the name of the chapter right here, Culinary Arts, Talent and Their Development. That's what's the work called. That's what they wrote. But where can I retrieve it? I can retrieve it in RF, and these folks, these are the editors. They put together a book called Psychology of High Performance, in which this chapter on culinary arts appears. Okay, so it's still who, when, what, and this is the where. It's just that the where gets a little complicated because you have to say it's in the edited book, what pages of the edited book, and then who's the publisher and whether or not there's a DOI. Okay, that's the most complicated you're going to get. And actually, once you get the sense of it, okay, I'm using the chapter. Okay, who wrote the chapter? What's the name of the chapter? Where did I find it? Once you get that syntax down, it helps a little bit. Now, I'm go a little faster because I don't want this to be going too long, but for government reports, again, same thing, author, date, title, source. It's just that usually your author is going to be an organization or a department. In this case, it's National Cancer Institute, and that's your author. Now, sometimes you are using slides that you found online, right? Like it's SlideShare. Okay, same thing. It's just that our sourcing is going to be a little different. So Jones wrote these slides, published on a certain day of a certain year. This is the title of the slide deck. But then you have to indicate in the brackets the type of media it is. In this case, it's PowerPoint slides. We're going to look at some other media too. And you also have to add here the two things you need to add. You need to add the type of media and who's hosting it. In this case, it's SlideShare, which is a hosting site for slides. Okay, and the rest all remains the same. Where'd you find it? Obviously, you found it. Here's the URL. So what's the media and who hosted it? That's part of the where can I retrieve it. Now, if your PowerPoint slides come from class, same thing. It's just that you're where. You still have, hey, where's your, what type of media? PowerPoint slides. But who's your host? In this case, Moodle at University of Redlands. And then whatever the URL, the basic URL is. Okay. Another type of media. Sometimes you want to cite a YouTube video. In that case, again, everything's the same. Author, date, title, but your sourcing is like the media sourcing that we've been doing. This is a video. That's the type of media. And who's hosting? YouTube. And then a URL. Now this would be like a news article on a web news site, like if you're at CNN.com or you're at BBC.com. Again, same author, date, what they wrote, the hosting site. In this case, it's HuffPost. Hosting site, CNN. Okay, so that's the thing you want to add is the hosting site, and then the URL. And that brings us to the end of our APA work. Next time, as I said, we're going to be conducting research through ARMCOS Library. I've tried to cover most of what you're going to encounter in terms of needing APA essentials. Formatting, in-text citations using paraphrasing or quotations, and then the most common forms of entries on your references list. So I hope that was helpful. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again.